All right, this is Mack Bolen, and I'm here with Rob Sherrill, and essentially this is going to be our first official broadcast of this season. We'll go ahead and go through everything Class A, 2A, and 3A, and talk a little bit about rankings. We're a few weeks into the season. Of course, we've got some big events coming up, and just kind of maybe touch on some of the stuff that's already happened. Would like to give a shout out to Donnie Reynolds, the new head coach at Providence Catholic. Wish him the best of luck. All right, so Rob, let's just jump right in at 1A, and what you got?
1A, for the most part, has only had a week of matches. There were a few miscellaneous matches the week of Thanksgiving when everybody started, but for the most part, everybody started last week, and there's been very little movement. Aurora Christian is still at the top of the list. They do have a couple of losses against 3A competition. They lost to Montini, first match of the year, and also have a loss to St. Charles East, but they've won everything else. It's otherwise in 1A, we're all we're all kind of counting down to January when Lena Winslow, Stockton, and Dakota finally meet again. Of course, I have them number 2 and number 3, and Lena Winslow Stockton has just crushed everybody they've wrestled despite their graduation losses from last year. And Dakota, like Aurora Christian, has a couple of losses to 3A competition. Of course, they lost to Oak Park River Forest in that quad at New Trier at Thanksgiving weekend. And at the Washington Duels, they lost 48-12 to DeKalb. But also at the Washington Duels, they beat the host school.
They beat Washington. I saw that. That was kind of surprising. Yeah.
So they're by 1A standards, they are the usual Dakota. So it'll be interesting to see how those two schools fare. Very little movement elsewhere. We'll get to the to what's coming up for them in a little bit, but as usual, 15 of the top 25 will be an Abe's Rumble, and that's coming up in about 3 weeks. So that's one of my favorite events of the year, and I'm looking very much forward to being there as usual.
Quick question: who rounds out kind of your top 5 and your take on Coal City moving up to 2A?
Yeah, it's interesting. Coal City is probably at about the same spot in 2A as they might be in 1A. I have rounding out there's a very strong top 6 in 1A. Orion number 4, Rock Falls, which was in 2A last year and moved back down. They are at 10-0 and number 5. And Vandalia, with only a loss to Belleville West in their annual season opener, is number 6. And some of the other highlights of the early of the top part of the rankings. Prairie Central, which is also 10-0, is not in the number 9 spot right now. And in the second 10, a lot of Central Illinois teams: Clinton, Monticello, Leroy, Hayworth, Tolono, all one right after the others. So those 5 schools are going to start meeting each other next week. So there could be a little movement there. But and we'll get to this when we talk about 2A. I started Coal City at number 8 in 2A, and they are already up to number 4. They have a win over Marist already. They have a win over Shepherd already. And, Mark Masters told me that regardless of what classification they're in, this could be one of his of the best teams he's had, which is saying something.
That is.
So they're already up to number 4. So they're they could be as dominant in 2A as they have been in the recent past in 1A.
It'll be interesting to see how the rest of their season plays out, because they're I mean, they beat Marist. I mean, Marist obviously isn't the Marist of old, like you and I saw maybe 5-6 years ago.
No, they're not, but they're better this year than they have been in the past couple of years, and they host Providence tonight, so that's a big one.
That's a big one.
We'll see how they do in that that match. It's been a big rivalry for many years.
Sure. Okay, so moving on to 2A, we had the Washington duels last weekend,
right? Washington, as usual, did not duck the top competition there. They wrestled Dakota first off, lost 36-32, but they did come back and beat Lincoln Way West in their second match by a point, 32-31, and then gave Lockport all they wanted before losing 36-31. So they're 1-2, but they are Washington. They are the 3-time defending champions, and they wrestled 3 very tough opponents in matches that were down to the last match caliber. Marion Central Catholic is a very strong number 2 at this point. They beat Glenbard East handily last Saturday, in a match that they lost to Glenbard East last year. And I'm not sure Glenbard East is quite what they were last year, but they are a top 25 team, so that's a key win. And they're looking at the rest of 2A, at least in the top 5, is Lamont, which just got started last Thursday, beating Lane Tech and Schaumburg. Coal City number 4, Dixon number 5, and the rest of the top 10, Oak Forest, Antioch, Crystal Lake Central with a strong performance at the Conant tournament, moving up to number 8. Bloomington and Geneseo rounding out the top 10 there as we are early in the season.
Okay. So kind of in 2A again, kind of some of the usual suspects we see in the top 10, mentioning, of course, obviously Washington, Crystal Lake Central, Oak Forest. But again, as I said before, I'm really interested to see how Coal City stacks up as the season goes on, because they're tough.
And even and the interesting thing is, even though they are 2A, Coal City is staying in the Rumble. And the Rumble organizers are actually very happy they're staying in the Rumble, because, next year with the redistribution, they're going to be back down in 1A. So, it was an interesting situation, not only with them, but with Clifton Central also going up to 2A, where they've been a very strong 1A program the last couple of years. Clifton Central this year took on Iroquois West as a co-op partner, and when you added those 2 schools' enrollments together, it put Clifton Central over the cut line by 7 students.
Oh, wow.
So they wound up going up to 2A.
And one more time, mentioning we talk about the co-op from time to time, because Lena Winslow, Stockton, and as you just mentioned, just kind of explain that again, because some people don't understand the whole co-op principle.
Right. Well, Iroquois West is it is just down 57. A couple of exits from Clifton, so it's not terribly far. But of course, when you co-op, as far for IHSA enrollment purposes, you take on the enrollment of the school you're co-oping with in terms of where you're classified for each individual sport, and the cut line uh, for wrestling is not going to be the same as necessarily as the cut line for other three-class sports, because there's going to be a different number of schools to divvy up from one sport to another. So, they might be 2A in wrestling, but they might be 1A in some other sport. So
now, and the co-op has worked out great for Lena Winslow Stockton.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And it's and that's a very interesting situation because the two schools are 1A. They play separately in football, and they're in 1A, and they usually wind up meeting each other in the fight. They didn't this year because Stockton got beat before they got to Lena Winslow in the bracket, but probably twice in the last 4 to 5 years they have played each other in the football playoffs. So, and then of course they and it is a situation where Stockton really does contribute a very significant number of wrestlers to that program. You might see other co-op arrangements where you might get one or two or three guys in your lineup from the co-op school. It's pretty much a half and half situation between Lena Winslow and Stockton, and that's kind of unusual.
Yeah, it's worked out very well for them in wrestling because they've been a perennial power in 1A in wrestling.
Right. And they should if they could get past Dakota in the regional, they're going to be and if they're on the opposite side of Aurora Christian, they'll be right there again. There's a lot more things we have to hope and pray for.
Right. Well, of course, right. Well, towards the end of the season, we'll have our annual angst when it comes to regional and sectional assignments.
Well, that show is coming down the pipe, as all of our listeners know.
Yeah, it's like an annual thing where they cram it all in one area, but that will definitely be coming up down the line. So
that'll be a show all unto itself once the assignments come out.
Oh yeah. Gotta love the IHSA, not with the P draw. Right. So anyway, now moving on to 3A, we had, of course, our two significant early season tournaments at the Foyts in Conant and the Moore Prettyman at Barrington.
Right. Those are a week behind us now, and this past weekend. Not a whole lot in the tournament realm, but some very impactful matches particularly at the mega duels at Wheaton South, where Naperville Central really capped off a very hot week with a 49-13 romp over St. Charles East.
Wow.
And in fact, they won their 4 matches last weekend and this is a school that I had honorable mention and a very low honorable mention, starting the year by an average score of 56-10.
Wow.
And this win over St. Charles East, and granted they were without a couple of guys, St. Charles East, including Justin Hull, the state place winner at heavyweight. Right. But this came less than 24 hours after St. Charles East had beaten Glenbard North.
Right. That's right. And that's after Glenbard North won Conant.
Yeah, they won
by a
Conan
sizable
easily,
margin too,
and had a great performance in their own quad the week before with wins over DeKalb, Manuka, and Addison Trail, all pretty impressively. And so they were a little. I think they were in a little bit of a funk on Saturday after the loss to St. Charles East. They were losing by 5 going into the last match against Huntley on Saturday, and needed Ronan Schulke to catch Huntley's 6-pounder and pin him to win by a point. So that was a big comeback for them. But if you remember last year, Huntley beat Glenbard North during the season, and what happened once they got to the state tournament. So same thing could very easily happen again. Both teams again very strong. So
absolutely. And speaking of Huntley, who first time down to the Elite Eight and manages to go away 4th place, upset Glenbard North, lost to Providence in the 3rd place match. And then in the off season, I was able to contact the tournament director at the Clash, and we got Huntley into the Clash this year.
Well, that's great. And, they're also in the big, in that big meet a week from Saturday where you have Montini and Marmion and Mount Carmel and a few, and, obviously not all wrestling each other, but they're part of that field.
It's a big field,
So they will get some big matches that day, and of course we'll be going over that next week. But
and DeKalb, I got to say DeKalb, and a shout out to JD Oliva. But DeKalb had a pretty good showing at Washington at the duels there.
Well, they've got 4 just outstanding freshmen in that lineup, and it's going to be interesting to see how they progress over the course of the year. One of them, of course, is Fabian Lopez's little brother, Damian.
His little brother.
And, the Curran twins, Tommy at 113 and Danny at 120, and then Bradley Gillum at 145, who was one of my wrestlers of the week last year. He's already had several big wins and duels so far this year. So those 4 guys, boy, I don't know if there's a program in the state that is going to benefit as much from a freshman influx as DeKalb is going to be with those 4 guys. It's going to be fun to watch.
And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they're at the meet at Oak Park this weekend.
Yes, they are.
And Providence, Washington, etc. That should be a big one too. There should be some good matches there.
Tonight is the start of just a monster 3-day stretch for Providence. They are all of them on the road. They are at Marist tonight. They are at St. Rita tomorrow night. And then Saturday morning at 9 o'clock, they're at your place with DeKalb and Washington. So 5 very tough matches for them in a 3-day period. So
absolutely,
this is going to be a huge measuring stick for them, as well as for the other teams that they face. So we'll see what Marist is made of tonight. We'll see what St. Rita is made of tomorrow night, and then of course the quad on Saturday.
And we have coming down the road here the expansion again of the Chicago Catholic League, which already grew by adding Montini and Marmion, and now they're going to expand even more. So it'll be interesting to see as that conference and tournament grows, which, I would say arguably, but it's not really arguably. The as conferences go, the CCL is definitely the toughest conference in the state.
It's quite. It is quite tough. There's no question about it. I think myself dating back to the old Sika days. That was. before that conference broke up about now it'd be about 15 or 20 years ago now. But it's just that was a great conference in the south suburbs, and they always had the four or five divisions, and each division would have its own conference tournament. And it was I think that was one of the things that eventually spelled the end of the conference was it was an opportunity obviously to honor some guys that might not win a regional or might not win a sectional, and I certainly see it from that standpoint. But I always wondered how great would a SECA-wide tournament with 30 or 32 teams be?
Right.
It would have. I think it would have been an outstanding event. I think you would have had to have it maybe as so many conferences do now. 2 weeks, maybe even 3 weeks before the regionals, because so many of those teams, would face each other again that soon. But it would have, if you had that tournament with 32 teams and maybe gave 8 places, that would have in the heyday of SECA, that would have been
a great tournament,
just an outstanding event.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would say this for a period, I would say that the Southwestern Suburban Conference was the toughest conference in the state during that time frame when the Chicago Catholic League was a little bit down. And of course, this is before they added Montini and Marmion Academy. When, Sandburg was really good and you had a lot of good individuals. The Lincoln Way Central was monster. Lincoln Way West was good. But right now, I think just the last few years, I would have to give the nod definitely to Chicago Catholic League as being the toughest conference in the state.
Yeah, speaking of Lincoln Way Central, of course, be interesting to see now what happens there now that Tyrone Bird has moved over there from Lincoln Way East. They've been down for 2 or 3 years, but you're going to see Tyrone build that program back up now.
Sure. Well, let's face it, Lincoln Way Central for a while there, they had about a 3 or 4 year run where they were a really, really good program.
They were quite. They were the best of that group for quite a while, and it's not like I remember to see them down like this, but I think they're going to come back.
I do too. Well, that area is a hotbed of wrestling. I mean, that's one nice thing. Even though they have to compete with guys going to, say, a Providence, etc.
Sure.
But they continually develop, and I would say Sandburg right now, just looking, they finished a little bit far behind Glenbard North, but I think Sandburg is starting to come back up again a little bit.
Well, we'll see. They haven't had a close match so far. Big blowout win over Stagg to start their dual meet season, and then easily over Friend Batavia Lyons Township on Saturday. So they'll get their first big test at Wheeling on Saturday, as we'll touch on that when we go over the schedule.
I would also note that Sandburg is back in the Clash this year. And in fact, I think this year, I think the Clash has more Illinois teams in it this year than they ever have in the past.
Of course, they were in the Cheesehead last year, and they were. Yep. They're another one of those teams that that had to make a choice.
Right.
And I'm not surprised that they chose the Clash either. So because
I do too, and I think the Clash was a good choice.
They've had so much success there over the years.
They have, and I think the Clash was a good choice too for Huntley, because they're more of a dual meet than a tournament team, and that kind of field would really help them out. The way they're progressing too, even though assistant coach Rich Tato left, and he's concentrating more on USA Wrestling and freestyle and Greco-Roman now. But he was a key part of the process. You know, when I talked to him at Dual Team State and mentioned, put the bug in his ear, and then I was able to contact Steve Elwood, and we were able to get them into the Clash field. It was very similar to about 4 years ago when I did the same thing with Providence Catholic, and I was able to talk to Healy and say, hey, you know, they're looking for another school. And I talked to, back then it was Lance Hughes, and Providence has been a mainstay in there since. And them and Glenbard North, even if they're not up in the top brackets, the way the Clash format is, they do well, you know, like on the second day in those respective brackets. And for those who don't know, you know, about the Clash and the dual meet format, you can't find a better tournament to prep for Dual Team State than tournaments like the Clash. And then the new one, I guess DeKalb is hosting one. And what, the other big one, of course, is...
Well, the Rumble, of course.
The Rumble.
But I'm really excited to see what's going to happen in the DeKalb duels this year, particularly with Naperville Central's rise, because these teams are going to, you know, Naperville Central and St. Charles East and DeKalb are all they're going to
collide.
They're going to meet in that event, and of course, you know, Aurora Christian is there, and you know, and Wheaton North and Lincoln Way West are there. It's just, you know, it's the best field they've ever had, and it's good. You know, a good team or two is not going to make that first bracket.
Sure. Oh, sure. So looking at your rankings in 3A, your top teams, go ahead and run it down.
Yeah, I think over the course of 2 weeks, Montini, Oak Park River Forest, Marmion, and Mount Carmel have a little bit separated themselves from the rest of the field, although it is early. I think when you look at about the next 8 or 9 teams, there's very little to separate them. I have Lockport at number 5.
Sure.
Naperville Central, at least for now, is up to number 6. And, you know, they have never been in my top 10 before. They are now. We'll see how long they stay. Followed by St. Charles East, Glenbard North, Huntley, and Manuka, and that rounds out the top 10. And you know, DeKalb is really kind of a 10A. Their schedule is so tough that they're always going to be in the conversation. And then following DeKalb, you know, Sandburg and Lincoln Way West are kind of just a notch below them. But I think you look at those, you know, 7 or 8 or 9 teams, there's very little to separate them.
Right. What I think.
Then, and they all wrestle each other at some point. So right. You know, they're going to decide where you know how they shake out eventually.
And I think it's interesting, though, too, if you look at a lot of those teams in the top, they're either, you know, Elite 8 or teams that, unfortunately, because of their sectional assignments, got eliminated before they had a chance to make the Elite 8. And, again, that's our annual rant come near the end of the season.
That's for sure.
But, you know, it's kind of like, you know, I looked at Mount Carmel, and Kading kind of brought the program along, and they had a resurgent, and then they get Surtsis in there as a head coach, and they continue to progress. And of course, they're going to be in the Ironman. I'm going to get a chance to see them. I'll get a chance to see Lockport, Montini, Marmion Academy, and then some of the teams like Marion, who are just sending a few individuals at the Ironman. But I was personally happy to see like Mount Carmel and Lockport make that leap to go to the Ironman. You know, make no mistake, last year, you know, and I talked to Oster, you know, and the Lockport team, and, you know, a lot of his guys got pretty beat up at that tournament. But you know what? Hey, That's what you got to do. You want to get better. You go on the national scene. Yeah, you're going to take some lumps, but in Montini went in there, finished fourth, just a fraction behind Wyoming Sem, but then lost to them in the dual meet. Interesting to see how Montini does. This year they lost a few guys, but they still got a lot of depth.
Yeah,
their lineup is still loaded. It's still loaded.
It's a good thing. It's a good thing you mentioned John Kading, because I'm going to tell you something. Leiden is not a pushover anymore. They've gotten off to a great start. They don't have any great wins yet. Probably their best win to this point is over Crystal Lake South, which is a top 25 2A team. But they're in the mega duels at Glenbard East this Saturday, and don't be surprised, if you see them, give Glenbard East a run and maybe even win if they get on the mat against each other, and don't be surprised if you see them win the West Suburban Gold Duel title either.
That would not surprise me at all. I mean, I've known John Kading for quite a while, not just for his wrestling, but also for his judo background. And I mean, he's the real deal. He's worked at Overtime School Wrestling, did a great job at Mount Carmel, and now he's doing a great job at Leiden.
They are coming back this year. They are going to be right in the mix, and and of course they're in a good spot sectional and bracket wise too. So we'll see whether that whether that pays dividends this year, or whether or whether they're still building. But
okay, so let's kind of look forward and see what's significant starting at 1A coming up maybe this weekend.
Schedule wise, look, if a couple of the meets that we had tonight, there were several involving ranked teams. The biggest one in 3A besides Providence Marist was Granite Deerfield, top 25 teams there. Sycamore was at Yorkville tonight in the Northern Illinois Big 12. A couple of good 1A matches. Leroy was at Monticello tonight, 15 against 14, and Mercer County was at Sherrard tonight, 18 against 19. Looking ahead to tomorrow, big match in the South Suburban Conference as Oak Forest wrestles Lamont. That'll be at Lamont, and that's number 6 in 2A against number 3. Revis is also there. That makes it a double duel, but Oak Forest and Lamont tomorrow night. Coal City hosts Aurora Christian tomorrow night.
Oh, that'll be a good one.
That'll be a big one. And another of the better matches in the West Suburban Gold, Addison Trail is at Downers South tomorrow night, so that'll be a good one. Moving on to Saturday, of course, we know that 4 of our teams are at the Ironman, Lockport, Marmion, Montini, and Mount Carmel. A lot of mega duel events still on Saturday, including 2 big ones in 2A in Central Illinois. The super duels that were at Pekin last year moved down I-74 to Bloomington this year, and that includes Triad, Mahomet, Seymour, Pekin, Quincy, Mattoon, Mascoutah, Belleville East, Rochester, Granite City, and Collinsville. They'll all wrestle at least 3 times. Some of them may wrestle 4, but that's always a big battle for position in Central Illinois. And the other big 2A super quad super duels on Saturday is at Springfield Southeast, where you have Chatham Glenwood Peoria, Notre Dame, Macomb, and the two Champaign schools at Southeast, and they'll all wrestle 3 duels. Couple of the mega duel events at in the 3A category, the Manuka duels, where Edwardsville comes up from the south. Yorkville's involved in that. Neuqua Valley, Lincoln Way East, and West Aurora are also there. And the Glen Bard East, which had a mega duel event last Saturday, has another mega duel event this Saturday with Leiden, as I said, the key attraction there. Also, Oswego, Waubonsee Valley, Oswego East, Grays Lake North, Highland Park, and North Chicago there. About several good 3A quads on Saturday. Of course, we've already mentioned the one that takes place at Oak Park River Forest with DeKalb, Providence, and Washington all there. That'll be a good one. These all at 9 a.m., of course. Good one at Antioch with Sycamore, St. Charles East, and Cary Grove, 2 2As and 2 3As there. Wheeling hosts Lamont, Sandburg, and Stevenson. That was a great one last year.
That'll be a good one, yes.
I know Maine Fan is going to be posting.
Yeah, he'll be there.
Posting the box scores, and we always look forward to those from Maine Fan.
Yep.
And a couple other good ones. Maine South, which is off to an 8-0 start, is at Warren for a quad, which also includes Mattia Valley and Brother Rice. And Lyons Township is hosting Huntley, Marist, and Oak Forest on Saturday. A good quad
that's a good
there.
One. That's a good one.
That'll be a good one at Lyons Township on Saturday. Some good 1A action on Saturday. They call this one the Monster Mash. It's for a good. It's a quad that these 4 schools have been at for several years, and it's Monticello's turn to host it this year. They'll have Belleville, Althoff, Orion, and Mercer County, 4 top 25 teams there. Vandalia will be hosting Leroy and Oakwood, and Oakwood with a win or 2 there probably will make their way into the top 25. And if they don't, then they could on Tuesday when they are at Gibson City with Hayworth and Monticello. So some really good action coming up in the next week.
And, of course, national-wise, we already mentioned the Ironman, which is huge every year. And you go to the Ironman, you can't walk 10 yards without bumping into a college recruiter. That's no BS.
Yeah, for sure. And I took a look at the of course for peons like me, the individual brackets are not yet up. But
they have the pre-seeds out on the website, and on Flow Wrestling. There are a lot of Illinois guys who were seeded well. I know particularly Pete Christensen, 195, had a pretty good seed. I think Fidel Mayora, just right off the top of my head. I know Sotelo at 106 from Marmion Academy had a pretty good seed. Lockport, individual-wise, Lockport's bringing 4 or 5 really, really strong individuals. I honestly think they'll do better this year in that kind of a format than they did last year. It'll be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think
with Ramos, Fernandez, et cetera, they've got guys who can go deep in that tournament. That's really, when you talk about the Ironman, that's really what it takes. You got to have about 5 or 6 guys who can get through that brutal quarterfinals and, get in the semis in place, and that's how you do well in that tournament, because
there's so many guys that, lose in their quarterfinals, and they lose their next match and they're done. And that's that's a tough road to hoe. But
that's the
kind of that's what we'll find out tomorrow night at that tournament, because quarterfinals are tomorrow evening, and so is the match right after. And boy,
Yep.
that's a blood round for sure.
Absolutely. And when you go in Saturday morning, you kind of get a feel like, okay, this is the team, and we'll kind of I'll kind of pick your brains here right now. National wise, from what I've seen, just looking at their lineup, Blair Academy really doesn't have any weak spots at all on that lineup.
No, they don't. Not with not with Mata coming in, and not with some of the guys down low they have now. Or we're not with the Mata and the Ferraris coming in.
Ferraris, right? Yeah, so, yeah, they're loaded.
And
they still have Colacchio.
It's very interesting because Allen is still in the tournament, and Allen would probably might possibly have been a top 25 team for me if the Ferraris had still been in the program. I don't know if they would have been or not, but they'd have been very close. I looked at the team list. I was able to identify about I think 34 teams that are entering at least 8 guys, and I have 15 of my preseason top 25 teams in Win Magazine are in the field for this, including 1, 2, 3, and 5. So so it's going to be a very interesting team race. But if you don't do well team wise at the Ironman, it's not necessarily a barrier, as we found at the end of the season last year, to entry into the top 25. I mean, I'll go back last year. Parkersburg South was is a case in point. They didn't do very well at the Ironman, but they came back and they finished in the top 3 in the Powerade. They did not have any bad losses on their record. They lost to St. Ed's, they lost to Wadsworth, but they crushed everybody else on their schedule that they should beat, and they got into my final top 25 at the end of the year, and even though they didn't finish high at the Ironman, that Ironman performance helped them. Same with Reynolds. Reynolds got into my top 25 at the end, even though they didn't do great at the Ironman. They wound up. They also wound up having a good finish at the Powerade. They beat Erie Prep later on in the year, and even though they're a AA team in Pennsylvania, last year they were the real deal. Now they lost a lot of guys, and they won't be there this year. But they are back in the field with a full team. So, they're just an example of one of the of how that event might might galvanize your team going forward as we get later on into the season. You can finish 10th or 12th or 14th, and it doesn't finish you for the rest of the season. You've still got lots of year left.
When you look at, Montini last year, they finished 4th at the Ironman. They put in a really dominating performance at the Clash. They won the Cheesehead, won the Chicago Catholic League Championship. Were able to get into that quad with Bergen Catholic, Wyoming Sem, and they lost a very tight one to Wyoming Sem, but then bounced back and beat the #1 team in the country.
That's right.
Head-to-head after that.
And that was just a situation where where their
matchups,
where they matched up so well that they were able to get that big lead and then hold on.
Right, and hold on. And then you look at a team like Oak Park River Forest, which I looked on the other rankings like Intermat and Flow Wrestling at the beginning of the season, weren't even ranked. And
yet they were one of the two Illinois teams that I had in my top 25.
Right.
Because you go back to last year, and hey, they were leading Montini with 3 matches to go, and this was and last year was a for real Montini team.
Oh, absolutely. But the thing that was funny is, they had a horrible performance against St. Edward in their bracket, but went through and blew through the second bracket with just absolutely blistering wins over Anoka and Simile, and then avenged their loss to Washington. But then next week, Cheesehead finished runner-up to Montini at that.
Right.
And they weren't even on the radar nationally for anybody up until that point, and finished way ahead. And then in their own tournament, they beat out Christian Brothers Catholic by over 100 points in a 12-team field, which was another highly ranked team.
Exactly. And it just kind of, Christian Brothers is just one of those programs that that I have to spend extra time evaluating, because they are Christian Brothers is what Montini was 2 years ago. They're great where they're great, but they don't put out a full lineup. And they had as great as they are in tournaments like the Ironman, and they did wind up winning their state for the first time last year. Mm-hmm. They also had dual meet losses to average teams. So you have to weigh all those things.
Right.
They were not by any stretch a complete team, and I just I just can't reward a team that's not a complete team. That's just not part of my methodology.
So do you think, realistically speaking, do you think that there's anybody out there, though, that can seriously challenge Blair this year?
Only Wyoming Seminary at this point. And again, both of them, if I go and look at the grid that I did for all these teams, before I do my rankings, I do a weight by weight on them of what they graduated, what they returned, and the quality of what they return. If you look at it, if you look at the teams in in total, Blair returns 11 starters, all national prep. All either state champs, place winners, or national prep champs or place winners, and 6 either state champs or national place winners. So 11, 11, and 6 for them, and for Wyoming Seminary, it's 10, 10, and 5. So they're close. It's 6 returning champs against 5 returning champs, 11 returning place winners against 10. That's not a terribly large gap, and both teams were able to the additions that they made were both at places where they would have been vulnerable had it not for those teams coming in.
Yeah, well, Blair definitely, as we already noted, really loaded up with transfers, which filled pretty much all their weaknesses.
So maybe 160, maybe maybe either 52 or 60, maybe either 70 or 82. Mm-hmm. And other than that, they're going to be just fine. And for Wyoming Seminary, maybe maybe 32 or 38, maybe one match between weight between 60 and 82, and other than that, they're going to be fine. So, the thing that I thing that will be interesting for me is does Lake Highland, for instance, have enough guys that will last to Saturday
right.
to hold up. They've got their 4 transfers. We don't know what those 4 guys are going to do on this stage.
Right. Well, and like you said before, Lake Highland Prep is one of those teams where they're good, but they do have holes.
Yeah, although I almost think that Lake Highland Prep, now looking at my grid for them, of course, the Riveras are, plug and play kids in terms of, in terms of they're going to be competitive right away.
Absolutely.
But but even without the Riveras, they have 9 guys back that were 3rd in the state or better.
Right.
So the question is how good are those 9 guys on an Ironman stage?
Right.
Are they guys that are they? Do they have a lot of guys that get past the quarterfinals? I'm not sure they do.
Yeah.
So that will be the big test for them. There aren't any Silvas in this lineup.
No.
There aren't. There are Kay Beals and there are Noah Castillos, who those are the kind. Buzakis will make it to Saturday, but how many of the other guys will? That's going to be the big test. For them.
And we could say, honestly speaking, Lake Highland Prep at this point has become the Brandon, Florida of old in that respect.
Right. Yes, and the 4 guys they got will be a big help, but we don't know how the 4 guys they got, even the Riveras, are going to fare on this stage. And tomorrow and Saturday is going to be
which is brutal. I mean, it is. It's when you talk about the Ironman, you're talking about you may face 3 nationally ranked guys in one day. If you're that good.
Especially if you're at 26 or 32 or 38.
Yeah, insane. Okay, so last year I think you had Bergen Catholic at the end of the year number 1 for
yes,
you, right?
I had them at the end of the year number 1.
So where do you see them this year?
That was an aggregate pick.
Yeah,
It was based on the number of quality wins they had against the rest of the top 10. They had more than anybody else. I have them 4 to start out the year.
Okay.
And they're not and they're the only team in my top 5, actually in my top 6, because I have St. Ed 6 that are not at the Ironman, but of course they'll have their chance later on in other things.
Sure.
I have Bethlehem Catholic 8. They're at the Ironman, of course.
That's Pennsylvania team, correct?
I have LaSalle number 11. They're there. I have Broken Arrow 12. They're there. Brecksville 13. St. John Bosco 14. Now they'll have 3 holes, so it'll be interesting to see how their other guys pick up the slack.
I don't think St. John Bosco has ever showed up at the Ironman with a full team.
No, they're entering 11. So but then I have Wadsworth at 19, Parkersburg South at 20, Gilroy at 22. Now they're only entering 8, so we'll see how their 8 fare. Elyria at 23, and Graham in their new era at 25. So
new era,
this is going to be a kind of a different sort of deal for Graham. Not being one of the favorites.
Okay, so nationally wise, speaking strictly with Illinois, I'm sure you have Montini up there somewhere.
Yes, I have them number 3. So
okay.
I only starting off. I only have 2 Illinois teams in the top 25,
which are.
And it's going to be interesting to see how the rest of them shake out. I have my. I see Mount Carmel finishing about where they did last year. I think I think they'll be in that 14-15 range. I think they have. I just don't think they have the past the quarterfinals guys in that lineup.
But, so nationally ranking wise, are Montini and Mount Carmel the only two Illinois teams you have in your top 25?
No, about Montini and Oak Park are the only two that I have. I do not have. Okay. Now, again, I only do 25. If I did 30 or 35, they would probably be in there.
Sure.
So, we'll see how they fare. I think I had either 5 or 6 Ohio teams in the top 25, and again, we'll see how the Ohio teams do. So because LaSalle is LaSalle, which I'm not sure they'll have a full lineup either. But they got a couple of middleweight holes, but this kid Cole Skinner that they have coming in at 106 is going to push everybody, their guys up from last year up a weight, and that will eliminate one of those holes, and then we'll see how they fare. Other than that, of course, they're coming to the Dvorak, so I expect to, which of course Montini is in this year.
Really, Montini's in the Dvorak this year?
Yes, they are.
I'll be darned.
So that will be so the Dvorak has an enhanced field this year.
Yeah.
So we'll see how. So we'll see how that shakes out.
All right. Well, we've got a lot of big stuff coming up. Just off the top now, are you going to be available next Thursday?
Next Thursday, no.
Okay.
I could do I could do it Wednesday if you want to do it.
Yeah,
Wednesday.
Let's do it Wednesday. Yeah, let's do it Wednesday because it would be great to do the Ironman recap, and of course a lot of the other quads that we talked about that were big. So we'll shoot for Wednesday.
Then 2 weeks down, and then 2 weeks down the line, I'll be available Thursdays for a little bit.
Okay.
So, and Wednesday next week I could do.
All righty, that's what we'll shoot for then, and we should be able to have a really good Ironman recap and some of the other stuff with the quads going on, particularly the ones we talked about already. And then, of course, we've got all the other big tournaments coming up. Be interesting to see Abe's Rumble again, of course, this year, and the DeKalb duels, which are going to be great. That's going to be a phenomenal field here in Illinois.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I can't see both events, but boy, the DeKalb duels really, when they expanded it to 32 teams last year, really burst on the scene, and the DeKalb duels really was really was a rankings setter for January last year, and I expect it to be again this year. And if you're in Northern Illinois and you want to see some great wrestling, some great team wrestling, boy, get out and see the DeKalb duels. It's gonna be hell on wheels.
See, me personally, I mean, I like the individual tournaments, but I really like the dual team format. That's one of the reasons why I go to the Clash, and I do announcing there too. But I mean, because that's the kind of format that preps you, juggling lineups, bumping guys. It preps you for the dual team series. And I mean, you can't get better experience than competing in that kind of a tournament. I mean,
it's going to be a lot of fun. And boy, if you have a chance to catch the second bracket at the DeKalb duels is going to be great too. Not just the championship bracket. Both those top two brackets are going to be absolutely outstanding.
And January 12th, the Beat the Streets is going to be a big one there that Oak Park Air Force is hosting. I'm going to be announcing on that. They might have another announcing spot. Hopefully, Rob, you can come up for that one because it's obviously going to be a beauty.
I would love to if I can swing it. I'm certainly going to try.
That will be a good one because we get to bring some of that national talent in that kind of format. And I think one of the last duels of the day is going to be Oak Park and Montini, which will be great. But you'll also have Poway, California. You'll have Lake Highland Prep, Florida. Mike Piazzo, head coach, who was former state champ for Glenbard North. And then obviously you got Bergen Catholic, which is still pretty good team.
I want to throw out a stat for you.
Sure.
This is, we talk about Montini having had a state champ for 19 years in a row now. Mm-hmm. I didn't realize this until George Deitch pointed out to me last week. Glenbard North.
Oh, yeah.
Has had a state champ 12 years in a row.
12 years in a row, right? That's right.
12 years. That's unbelievable. How that got by me, I am so embarrassed to not have known that. But, you got to think Abe Assad is going to make it.
I was just going to say, and he's going to be the favorite. He's going to repeat.
They're going to tie Waukegan for the second longest streak in state history.
And that would be the old Waukegan, of course, back in the day.
I remember when I was first getting involved doing history, being so impressed by that streak and thinking, geez, nobody is ever gonna top that. And now we've seen Montini top it, and we're going to see Glenbard North probably match it in February. And not only that, but they have done it in the high. Montini has done it in all kinds of classifications. Right. They started off doing it in Class A.
Class A, right?
Glenbard North has done that in AA and 3A. That is a heck of an accomplishment.
Oh, absolutely.
To do that 13 years in a row in what might be the toughest single classification in the country. Boy, hats off to Mark Hahn and his staff and what they have accomplished with that streak that, is 12 now, likely to be 13.
Yeah, well, you had all those days. You had the Cortez days, Austin Gomez. Well, shoot, go even back for Joe Gomez. You had, and then Abe Assad, and he's probably going to repeat this year. I mean, he's a favorite.
Right, and that's he's probably their ticket to tie Waukegan at 13.
Yeah, and speaking of dual team stuff, if I wanted to go back to the old days of Chuck Farina and East Leiden, what they accomplished, had there been a dual team state tournament back in the late 60s, mid 60s into the 70s, East Leiden probably would have won 11 or 12.
They probably would have, but think about all those great teams that that they had in those days. I mean, when we had one class.
Yeah. Oh yeah, and it was one class.
You were lucky to get 3 guys to the state tournament.
Oh, absolutely. It was brutal. It was brutal.
People. I mean, I roll my eyes at people who complain about Rock Island winning the state tournament with 2 kids. Look beyond that.
Yeah.
They had to compete in the sectional against Bolen, against Geneseo, against Sterling, against Pekin, against all those great programs. How are you going to get more than 2 or 3 guys out of a sectional?
Yeah, well, that's all. And back then you didn't have 3 or 4 qualifiers. You only had 2.
Stop complaining about it.
You had 2 guys go through district. And then you had two guys go through sectional. That was it.
Guys, you have to, and if you lose in the semis, you got to survive a wrestle back.
Yeah.
If you lose in the finals, you got to survive a wrestle back just to get to the stage.
For a true second, absolutely.
If anybody out there is listening who thinks that was a bad thing, I want you to just shut up right now.
Yeah.
Because you have no idea how tough it was to get to the state in those days.
It was brutal.
And for if you were talking about East Leiden, you were talking about Proviso. You were talking
Proviso
about
East, yes.
You were talking about all these great teams where you were lucky to get, maybe 5 guys to the sectional.
Yeah.
And then maybe 3 guys to the state.
Well, I mean, and I wrestled when Oak Park River Forest was decent, but we were in the district that had East Leyden, West Leyden, Proviso East, and out of that district, we had 6 state champs.
Exactly.
Out of one district.
Yep. There you go. So
how are you going to get through that?
You have to look at that, in the context of what the competitive environment was like in those days, and how tough it was to get a guy past the regional, and how tough it was to get a guy past the sectional.
Oh, it's brutal.
Well, okay. You get to the state, man, you got a chance.
Yeah, well, and you finished 3rd. You didn't make it to state. Heck, that one year you had a previous state champ from Oak Lawn, his senior year, get eliminated in a sectional because he lost to Staples from Proviso East. Sizek, I'm talking about, Jim Sizek from Oak Lawn. And he gets eliminated by Staples in the semifinals, and that's it. Boom, done. You got no chance. You finished 3rd, boom, but you ain't going to state.
Boom, done. And then what happens if you lose in the finals? You might have to win a wrestleback match against that guy who finished 3rd. You might lose in the finals, and you might lose again, and you're sitting at home.
Yeah, the streaks that Farina had at East Leyden in dual meet competition were really impressed me, because they were wrestling the toughest competition every year, and they had 2 different streaks. I know one was about 59 in a row, and I'm not gonna. I don't want to insult downstate guys, and streaks from downstate teams, but you didn't wrestle the same competition in dual meet.
There were fewer schools down there.
Absolutely. There were good ones, and they were decent, but it's just not the same, and the funny thing is, they took a loss to one of the Maines, I think it was Maine East, that broke the 59 streak thing, and they had half their lineup sick. But then, of course, in 70, the year that they had the 4 state champs. Oh, that was amazing.
That was also the year that they won the state in football, and all their football players came back late, and the Maine East tournament was a big deal. Thanksgiving Day tournament and the weekend tournament in those days. And of course they went and they didn't come close to winning, but of course they didn't have their football players. Their football players were all playing football.
Yeah, but they did a phenomenal job that year in 78 in the state finals. And that was under 12 weight classes, 4 state champs and a 3rd place finisher.
Yep.
Yeah.
Boy,
that's impressive.
And those guys, and those guys were all football players. When you think about it,
yeah,
you talk about all-star coaching. They had Jack Leese in the fall coaching them in football,
and then
going undefeated, winning the state. And then they had Charlie in the it switched over to Charlie for the wrestling season.
Yeah,
who raced the state in the state tournament there. So you want to talk about a dream school year for a school? Yeah. Boy, that was it.
Yeah, it sure was. All right, well, we'll go ahead and wrap this up, and then again, we'll go ahead and shoot for Wednesday. Then next week we can do the Ironman recap and the other quads. At the same time, Rob, throw your email address out there for anybody who's watching. Please, if you are
if you're involved in one of these duels Saturday,
send us results, box scores, whatever you can.
Sherrill 3062 at Gmail. That's SHERRILL 3062 at Gmail. And I respond to every email I get as all my emailers know. And thank you for everything you do and everything you send.
Absolutely, guys. And remember, Rob does the rankings, both individual and team. So that's the kind of input he needs. Now, if you have any input as far as the webcast, etc., you can also contact me. I'm at Bolen, Bolen 4 at Comcast.net. And I will also say that I'll be doing some interviews at the Ironman. I will upload them on YouTube and post them on Illinois Mat Men. A lot happening here. Of course, we got a long season ahead. So this is kind of like our first one this year. Plenty to come. And we'll see you guys later. Hope everybody enjoys these podcasts. And I'm going to go ahead and say good night and hope you enjoyed it. And Rob, thank you again so much for all you do.
Enjoyed it. Thanks.